All right, it's Tata's Tuesday, and so it was a bit of a tough week to find something to talk about this week. I didn't think the Nintendo Switch was something to talk about on the Gender Day. Uh, but I did find this story that I found very interesting. It's about the representation by gender at the Davos Economic Forum. And for people who don't know what it is, it's, the World Economic Forum, and it's, the most influential people in all businesses everywhere. And the interesting thing that you may not know about Davos is it has a gender quota. For every 5 men attending, a company has to bring at least one woman. I'm assuming at the same company, and I say this because of the way the map breaks down. So I guess it's not a firmly, a firmly enforced quota. It's just a request. It says a request. So I think quota is probably an inaccurate term. Let's see what this link through says. It says has requested. So it's not really a quota. It's a guideline is what they probably should have said. But the interesting thing is, 1 in 6 attendees being female is, it's between 16 and 17%. And this went in 2011. And as of last year, it was at 18%, which is right on the quota. This year, it's 21% female. So that's, 1 in 5. That's not 1 in 6. So that's very interesting. But and as you can see, it's way up from the 9 to 15% seen during 2001 to 2005. What's interesting, though, is the breakdown by region. And you'll see it's this little interactive globe where it's the various breakdowns. Not surprising, Western Europe and the United States are the big old blobs on this map. But when you break down by region, the embarrassing thing for me was that Turkey over here is sending more women to the World Economic Forum than Canada is. Even by percentage of delegates, Turkey's at 35%. Canada's at 21%, still above quota, but United States is 26%. So for all of Canada's its current year, right. The United Kingdom is higher, France is higher, Switzerland is slightly higher, and, Switzerland has a lot of, Italy is higher, like Canada. What are you doing? And I'm just picking fairly large blobs on the map. Like, okay, we're doing better than China, I think. No, we're not. Yeah, we are. Just better than China. Huzzah. We're doing better than Russia. We're doing better than Japan. Man. By percentage, we're not doing as well as Brazil. And Panama's doing better than us. Costa Rica's a whopping 100% because they have one delegate. And then, of course, the ones that are 100% or nearly 100% male are not terribly surprising. Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates. Around here, not the best. Hey, Palestinian territories has 40% female representation. That's pretty cool. But they're doing better, which is interesting. The Palestinian territories has more women going based on, delegation than Israel does. That's very interesting. But I mean, this is not surprising, right? For the most part, where the huge clusters of male overrepresentation are. And that's why when I looked at it, it's like, these have got to just be guidelines because so many of these places are not meeting the 1 in 6 threshold. So that's why I wonder if CNBC didn't call it a quota to sort of ruffle some jimmies and get people more angries. But it's interesting as well because I think it would surprise a lot of people that more participants are coming from Western Europe than America, and that might simply be because of where it is. That's what I would say, because it's just not as far to go to Switzerland from, Western Europe to North America, because, for obvious reasons. But the other interesting thing is what kind of industries are there, which is obviously going to skew what kind of representation is there. And as you'll notice, public sector, civil society, arts, and academia have the most participation. And I wish they broke these ones down by gender, because that would greatly interest me to see what people, what I guess they don't know yet. But you'll see that this kind of big catch-all is followed by banking and finance. This isn't surprising at Davos. But then media and entertainment, which we know has a real gender gap issue, followed by food, beverage, and goods, followed by energy. I guess information technology is above energy, but that's really interesting. And I wonder if something like gaming would be in media, entertainment, or IT, And this, I'd like to see sort of the breakdowns by gender in each of these, because I think that would be just as telling, if not more telling, than the geographic breakdowns as well. Because what kind of companies are in these various areas? And, because we all know that something like, say, arts and academia have and public sector workers have far more women than information technology, right? So these are interesting numbers. The other thing that I found so interesting is the ages. You'll notice a fairly significant spike in CEO attendance between, like, we'll say, this big nose here, so 50 to about 60, 61, 62. You look over at the female side, there isn't the huge cluster. And this is interesting to me, because for these women down here who are high enough in their companies to go to Davos before they're 40, what do they do for the rest of their lives? Like, where's the upward mobility in their companies? And they are saying, one of the things this article did say was that the concern for some attendees is not, right here, one woman they spoke to, they're more concerned about faster progress in moving women up the ranks of corporations, nonprofits, and government entities. And that, I'm curious about that, because you've got 3 delegates here around the age of 20. So, what companies are these people coming from? Like, why are there a greater proportion of female attendees in these, this sort of startup zone? And why don't we see the same kind of surge? It happens earlier, and it's not as intense. It's interesting. I don't know what that means, but it's interesting to take a look at it and see that it's not just different in terms of representation, it's different in terms of age gap. And why isn't it just this side but smaller? Really makes you wonder, right? I mean, the biggest spike for CEOs, COOs and men are 54, 55 years old, which is about what you'd expect, right? It's way more spread out with women, and that's very interesting. But yeah, the other thing they're talking about, and I found this really interesting. By the way, the panel title's stupid. I mean, can women have it all? Seriously? People were talking about that in the 80s. We haven't moved beyond that? Are you serious? Disrupting the status quo of gender roles. That might be an interesting panel. It might be a big ton of bullshit. Because I think the women who are in attendance at Davos have disrupted the status quo of gender roles. Like, talk about preaching to the choir. But they talk about, and this is a big thing, that the studies on this stuff have identified that networking is a big issue, that the programs that they put up have had women network with other women. And so they're saying that The same woman who sort of said, I want, upward mobility within companies, but she also said that it's important to help women network not just only with other female leaders, but also male leaders. And this is a real issue that I think no one wants to rip the Band-Aid off because it's kind of uncomfortable. And this is something that I've struggled with, because if I have the least concern that there will be any implication of shenanigans, I will take my husband to a meeting, because it is amazing how many people have either claimed I slept with someone I just had a working lunch with, or said themselves that we were sleeping together, and no, we weren't. And there's no easy answer for what to do about that, other than just gossip less, and I know that's going against the personal is political, but if there's this immediate assumption that whenever you see a man and a woman alone together at a meal, there is something going on, this is really going to affect upward mobility for women, because men are going to think twice about that situation. And women, of course, are going to think twice about that situation, but I quite frankly think it's the guys that are more uncomfortable in this day and age, because they don't want people getting yelled at. They don't want to be accused of anything if things don't go right. And like that or not, that's a legitimate concern now. So it's an interesting place right now, because we kind of know where we need to go. How to get there is going to take some trial and error and some experimentation. And this is why I've been so down on this idea of call out bad behavior and all this stuff, because part of experimentation is that things are going to go wrong. And I keep going back to that situation at GDC for Minority Media, where they made an experiment regarding virtual reality and, inappropriate behavior and harassment and assault and all that stuff. And people started accusing them of being, basically, it wasn't an experiment that simulated sexual assault. It was sexual assault. This is one of the accusations leveled at them. You can't do that, because it was a controlled environment. Everybody knew going into it what they were getting into. That is a form of consent, okay? And what was so interesting about the whole thing to me is that even going in knowing it was going to happen, it was still creepy for everybody involved. And it would be great if various industries could be more grown up about this stuff. But that is going to take some work, and that is going to take some doing, and that is going to require a greater diversity of female opinion in all businesses, and dialogues with, men in these businesses, instead of men they think, okay, I just have to sit down and shut up now, because that doesn't get a flow of ideas, right? Like, who wants to talk to somebody you can't talk to? You just have to sit up and nod respectfully at everything they say. That's not an equal playing field, right? And so I don't think that it's interesting, because some people would say that a quota is artificial and it's not based on merit. And so some people would really react badly to the idea of the World Economic Forum instituting a quota. But it seemed to be kind of voluntary and a request. They didn't kick anybody out for not meeting that quota, or all those Middle Eastern countries I just pointed out wouldn't be able to go. But they tried it. And what's interesting is that these are global leaders in business. This means they like to make money a lot. And once they started the habit of including more women on their delegations, they went over and above collectively. And that's very interesting to me, that they didn't have to do more, but they did do more once that sort of behavior got reset. And, so, in those countries like, the US that went over and above what they had to do, the US had to hit 16, 17%, they did 26%. So, we can reasonably assume that, at least 10% of those women, it's just raw merit. They were there because they're supposed to be there. And that's encouraging. And I'm sure there were some people who would say, oh, we're 50% of the population, but blah, 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 it's not enough. And I understand that sentiment. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was yesterday, and the not talked about part of the I Have a Dream speech is about, rejecting gradualism. But I think that it's going in the right direction. And that's the important thing. The raw numbers are, quite frankly, less important year to year than the trend line. And the trend line is clearly very good, up from 9 to 15% from 2001 to 2005, up from 18% last year. That's what we want to see, because apparently gender parity in economics, and that doesn't mean big business, that means global economic equality. We won't get gender parity in economics until 2186. And it's things like, as you see, women working more days a year than men. Well, that flies in the face of this idea that men get paid more because they work longer hours and work more time. That's a 50 minutes a day more work, and this is globally. So it's 170 years before there's global economic equality. And it's interesting because that's down. Remember I said about trend lines? That's down from 2015, where it was going to be achieved by 2133. Now it's interesting. Number of women holding senior positions, labor force participation. That means the number of women in the workforce compared to the number of men. So that's really interesting that the women in the workforce are working harder, but there are fewer of us globally. I'm not talking about North America, but it's also, they say salaries. Women just aren't getting the salaries, but lack of senior positions, and the two things are probably connected. And then you see there's concerns that the lack of women in tech and the preponderance of new jobs coming from those sectors being a big concern. And this is why I went, really, Switzerland had less, because Scandinavian countries tend to be the best with gender parity. Iceland, Finland, Norway, Sweden. And let me tell you, having been to that part of the world, you feel it. It is a very different overall vibe, even when you're going out drinking. And let me tell you, drinking in Finland is like nowhere else on the planet. I have not seen drunk like that. Those people can drink. And then it's, believe it or not, it's Rwanda in 5th place, Ireland in 6th place. The United States is at 45th position out of a total of 114 countries. The United Kingdom is in 20th place. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but these are the sorts of things that big, rich countries are not getting where other countries have gone. And I mean, you can't say that Finland isn't technically advanced. It was, when I was there, it was the cell phone capital of the world. Nokia was booming at that point. People had 2 and 3 cell phones. I saw cell phone designs there that didn't hit North America for years after I was there. It's a tech hub. And so, this is really interesting when we look at some of these things. and this is what this attendee said, is that attendance at this forum, Norway, Sweden, okay, they don't seem especially, represented here, but that doesn't mean they're not represented in the workforce in their home countries. And that's, some of these places may be putting on a little bit of optics to kind of, put a rug over it so you don't see the scratch on the floor or the blood stain. That's a video game thing. But I'm not saying it's a violence against women thing, no. But it's interesting to treat these indicators for what they are. And sometimes just taking a look at it is enough. I know I've got this one critic on YouTube who keeps insisting I'm not forward thinking enough and I don't offer solutions. But I think that we gotta kind of get the information out there before we can move towards solutions, because there's still too much nonsense clouding innovation in terms of this and a lot of other things. And it's led to some really bad misnomers, some really bad junk information that people have been basing things on. And I think that there is a benefit to just putting the information out there. Because on some things, I'm very sure what we can do. When it comes to making the video game industry more inclusive for women, there are a lot of really simple freaking things that can be done, and really basic stuff. And I'm not going to get into that here because that's not the purpose of these events, but I'm sure they're different from region to region as well. I mean, I'm talking about Canada and then E3. There's very basic things that can be done to make women feel more like equal participants in these events. Whereas other parts of the world, who knows? It might not have the same needs. It might not be the same social messages. It's, one of my big things is when you start targeting the modesty of cosplayers, that's going to affect female attendance a lot more than men, because, men walk around with their shirts off at the beach. With women, it's more of a bold statement when you talk about aggressive navels in cosplay. And it doesn't matter that they don't tend to act on those things. They did in the case of Jessica Nigri, and I think she was unfairly singled out. I think that it's silly that you can have a character in a game but not a real life woman dressed like that character in a game. Like, it's so foolish. And the number of places I see, barbarian men or something like that, no one says their navels are aggressive. This is something that strictly targets women. And a lot of the time it's women enforcing these rigid social norms on other women. It's not the men pushing these decisions. And this is something else we really have to look at in terms of women moving through corporate rankings, in terms of why women aren't advancing at work. The most horrible, rotten, no good stories I have from dealing with moderate to large corporations involve other women. They're not men. Most of the men involved were totally fair for me. It was women who did the backstabbing and women who drove other female staff away. And this is something that really isn't talked about, because we look at this issue as something men do to women, not an issue that society does to women. And even people on this very YouTube channel, when I say culture or when I say society, you guys hear men. And no, it's not that. Culture is not something that men do to women. Culture is something that our earliest gender enculturation is done to us by our own mothers. So, this idea that discussing these things is automatically putting men on the spot, I think can be avoided. Because get a bunch of women talking about work, I guarantee you the horror stories about female executives will emerge. At least in my case, oh Lord. Yeah, I keep thinking I think I had fewer positive associations with female executives at places I'd work than negative ones. So net negative with female executives. I can't say the same thing about men. And that's, that is just my personal experience. But it really tells me that I think one thing we really have to look at are, why aren't women advancing? Why are women bailing out? Why don't women rise through the ranks? I think one of the things we should be looking at and aren't, along with all the other things that are super important, is what the current female executives are doing to their female employees. And that's not popular. Oh, Lord. But I think it's something that's important to look at, because, how do you lean in when somebody's looking to just claw your face off? Can you tell I have trauma? Oh, boy.